So, without rehashing everything that you watched in the two video clips, in fact, President Eisenhower was allegedly meeting with a group of aliens. No, he didn't chip his tooth. That's where he disappeared to, according to this story. He went to Edwards Air Force Base to meet with a group of aliens to discuss an exchange of technology for natural resources, which, according to the story, is how this was supposed to take part. And he gets to Edward Air Force Base. He watches the UFO land on the tarmac, at which point some aliens disembark from their UFO and meet with President Eisenhower. Now, you might be thinking it's your typical gray aliens that he met with. No, actually, in fact, according to this story, his first meeting, keep that in mind, it's the first meeting that President Eisenhower had was, in fact, with the group of aliens known as the Nordics, or the tall white aliens. Most people commonly call them the Nordics. They're very tall with long blonde hair. And they look like people that are Nordic, hence Nordics. But allegedly, President Eisenhower met with these Nordics. The Nordics offered up some technology in exchange for the United States and presumably the world to cease creating nuclear or atomic bombs, or at least downplay the amount that they were creating. Sounds very 50s sci-fi movie. But the fact of the matter is, that's the alleged part of the story, is the Nordics wanted them to stop creating atomic bombs. At which point Eisenhower actually declined the offer of their technology to stop making atomic weapons. And according to the story that's crafted around the Greada Treaty, this wasn't the Greada Treaty. This, in fact, was turned down by Eisenhower. The Nordics accepted his decision and peacefully left the planet, where in which Eisenhower went back and went to church the following morning, and we've already covered all of that stuff. Well, you might think that was the end of it. But the following year, allegedly, President Eisenhower went to Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, at which point there was another group of aliens that landed and met with him. And this time it wasn't the Nordics that he met with, but it was in fact the group that we're all aware of, the gray aliens that he met with. And this is where the Greada Treaty comes to fruition. The deal, the treaty, the Greys would offer up some technology to the United States in exchange for the rights to be able to abduct a certain number of citizens for them to do experiments on. And Dwight Eisenhower allegedly agreed to this treaty. The aliens would be able to abduct a certain amount of citizens, and the United States government, i.e., the military, would allegedly get some alien technology to help us in the Cold War. That, in essence, is what the Greada Treaty is all about. But wait, there's more. So now you have sort of the basis of what the Greada Treaty actually is supposed to be. And there isn't a ton of verifiable proof out there. Matter of fact, this whole Greada Treaty thing didn't really come to light in our society until right around the 1980s with the release of another thing that kind of has question marks to it called the Blue Planet Project, which is a book of a whole bunch of alleged whistleblowing secrets that we never knew, like the government working with aliens, all types of aliens that are on the planet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the Greada Treaty was part of that. And that really has no basis in fact either, other than it's a really well put together piece of science fiction. Could some of it be true? I suppose some of it could, but there's no evidence behind it to prove that any of it is true. And like I said, there isn't any verifiable evidence as far as testimony from people involved with President Eisenhower, people that were actually at this Greada meeting with the aliens. No video, no audio of it, no pictures of it. So there's really no proof behind it. But here's the thing, it just continues to grow and grow and grow since like the 1980s with the Blue Planet Project. And it's gotten so big now that TV shows are really starting to kind of talk about it almost in a speculative way, but they're kind of insinuating that it's real or it really happened. And we don't really know if it did or not. I'm going to tell you my 2 cents when we're done with all of this. But the last, say, 10 or 15 years, we've started to get other people speaking out that claim they have inside information about it. One such person is actually Dwight Eisenhower's great granddaughter, Laura Eisenhower, who has a lot to say about the Greada Treaty and her great grandfather. And put it out there right now that she never knew her great grandfather. She was born about a decade after he passed away. So let's just let's hear what she has to say.
Believe that President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed a peace treaty with an alien race in 1954 that might have allowed for human abductions. I mean, if this is true, it would be an explosive revelation. So I'm going to continue my investigation by speaking with Laura Eisenhower, President Eisenhower's great-granddaughter.
Hi there.
Hey Laura, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good, good. Hey, thank you for meeting with me. I've heard a lot about some rumors that I'm hoping you can either confirm or deny for me. I'm just going to come right out and ask you, do you believe that your great-grandfather, Dwight D. Eisenhower, signed a treaty with extraterrestrials?
It's a true story. What I have learned about Eisenhower's relationship to extraterrestrial beings and ET government treaties is that supposedly in 1954 there was a meeting at Edwards Air Force Base.
Right.
Okay, a couple things there. 1954. One of the things with the Greada Treaty is you get a lot of different years. Some say 54, some say 55, some say 54 and 55, and then some say 55 and 57. So they're not really all getting the years completely accurate. The other thing, and maybe this is just me, even though she never knew her great grandfather, I just think it's kind of weird that she refers to him as Eisenhower. She doesn't necessarily have to say my grandfather Eisenhower, my grandfather Ike, but maybe it's just me. Maybe that's how my family dynamic was, that even though I didn't really know my grandparents, they passed away before I was born. I still, to this day, if I talk about them, I'm going to say my grandparents or my great grandparents. I'm not going to say, Irwin or anything like that. I find that weird. Maybe I'm way off base on that.
They seemed to have diplomatic intention. The treaties had to do with bartering exchanges of planetary goods, natural resources, elements, and compounds. And it was in exchange for things like abduction.
Why?
And that's pretty much what we've been talking about. The aliens came and offered some of their technology in exchange to the ability to abduct some certain number of aliens or humans, excuse me.
Would they want to abduct humans? What are they doing with that?
But they need our DNA. We have a treasure of DNA that is basically a living library.
Laura Eisenhower explains that aliens wish to analyze our DNA in their quest to unlock the secrets of the universe, which they believe is hidden in the DNA of all living creatures.
It's interesting you say that, because the abductees that I've talked to, that seems to be a very common theme. If you were in your grandfather's place, I mean, do you have a better understanding? Do you blame him for what he did?
Now, I cut the video off there because she is and there's nothing against people that are into all the conspiracy theories, but she is clearly a very deep state conspiracy person. And at that point in the interview with Ben Hansen, she really kind of went into that deep, dark corner, more of making speculation. Some conspiracies are derived in some sort of fact, and they sort of balloon from there and kind of take on their life of their own. Whereas some conspiracies, there's not a single shred of evidence, potential evidence, but yet the conspiracies continue to grow. And that's kind of where she went with that whole Eisenhower allowing aliens to abduct for DNA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I kind of cut that off there, because it didn't really have much to do with the Greada Treaty. But what do I think of the whole Greada Treaty? If you've listened to Boldly Pod over the past 8 years, you kind of know that I sort of ride that middle ground on a lot of things. I'm not an absolute skeptic, but I'm also not a true believer as well. I tend to lean toward the believer side on some things, and on other things, I tend to lean, I need more proof. So I lean a little bit on the skeptical side on some things. So as far as the Greada Treaty, what I honestly think is sometimes you can say that things are based in fact. Then again, you can also say that some things are just completely fabricated and create a life of their own. I think the Greada Treaty, somebody took that little missing time that Dwight Eisenhower had in 1954 and spun a very intricate yarn about aliens, because you got to stop and think. In the 50s, it was the heyday of the contactee movement. And UFOs were all over the place. That's where Project Blue Book was actually created. So UFOs were prevalent on the minds of people, and people thought about that. And you would think, even we talked earlier on To Boldly Pod about Roswell and how nobody really talked about the incident at Roswell from 1947 until about the late 1970s. And then it kind of started coming to life again. And could the same thing have been true for the Greada Treaty? It got buried and hidden so much in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that nobody dug it up until the 1980s, and then it's taken a life of its own since then. Yeah, I suppose they could. But there isn't any verifiable proof. You don't have any eyewitness testimony like we had with Roswell, with the Greada treatment. And I do think it's kind of funny that people have clumped the whole Dulce war with the Greada Treaty, because one of the additions to the Greada Treaty is the fact that the aliens broke the treaty because they started abducting more people than the government agreed to. And that's what started the Dulce War. So I think it's a fun story. I don't think there's any basis in fact. Do I think it happened? No. Could it have happened? I suppose. But do I honestly think that it happens? No, I don't. But hey, if you've heard about it and you have an opinion, let me know in the comments, because I really would love to hear your 2 cents about the Greada Treaty. And as usual, as I do on To Boldly Pod, I don't have a closer, but I do have a closer for After Dark. So I'll just use that closer. It's kind of win-win, right? Because it's after dark. And as we all know, nothing good ever happens until after dark.